But it's a bit weird that in 2024, people still do not know about geothermal, right? I think there's only one type of renewable and green type of energy that excites me, and that is geothermal. But if we want to do geothermal for market ABC, how would we implement it? Where would we start? How much finance would we need? What are the policies? Do we have policies? But what I really hope is that this search for green electricity and green heating and cooling with a, let's say, certified 24/7 offering, that stays, because that is the real game changer here for geothermal.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Geothermal Unleashed, where we're going to explore the cutting edge of geothermal energy. I'm Elizabeth Cambre from Vallourec New Energies team, and I'm here to help educate and document geothermal's rise in the global energy transition. And I want to give a special thanks to Think Geo Energy. So joining me today is Marit Brommer, the CEO of the International Geothermal Association. And Marit, we haven't had the opportunity to sit down before, so I'm really excited to meet, and I want to learn about the International Geothermal Association. But before we jump into that, I want to dive in and ask you to share with us a little bit about your background. So where did you grow up? What is your educational journey, and how did your career path lead you to the geothermal industry?
Well, excellent questions. But first and foremost, thanks, Elizabeth, for having me on your podcast. And I really like the title, Geothermal Unleashed, because I think that's exactly what we all strive for here and in the coming decades to come. Wow, talk about myself is always a little bit harder than just about geothermal, but here we go. So I am Dutch, and I'm born and raised in Amsterdam, the capital city of the Netherlands, which is a very small country, especially when you compare that to the US of A. And I was born there a few years ago, of course. And the Netherlands has a few, let's say, interesting, features, I would say. We are below sea level. So I was born minus 11 meters. I speak in meters and Celsius, by the way, so I don't do miles and Fahrenheit. So minus 7 meters below sea level. And I think these days when you land on Schiphol Airport, which is our main central, let's say, airport, it says, welcome to below sea level. And I think we have coined that sort of slogan as well, because we're quite proud of it as a Dutch person, I guess, that we have managed to live below sea level, as in that we have managed to live with land that is not necessarily there when you just would let it go unleashed, if you like the little bridge towards your beautiful podcast. And traveling the world as a young kid with my parents, I sort of realized that the world looks quite different from place to place and from country to country. Even, of course, within Europe, we have fundamental differences in the type of countries between, let's say, Netherlands and Northern Europe, or the Netherlands and France and Spain, etc. But let alone when you travel the world and you see countries like the States or Southern America, or you go to beautiful islands such as in Indonesia, you really try to understand a little bit where this whole, let's say, difference is coming from. And that has sort of led me to really become a passionate geologist, I guess, in the end. And the combination between exciting journeys and exploring, let's say, new type of countries and cultures in combination with understanding, well, planet Earth as a whole and the system that's driving us, let's say, living here on this planet, that sort of really captured me in my educational journey. So I'm a geologist, and I have a PhD in geophysics, and I've worked until 7 years ago only in oil and gas, my friends. So I come, like yourself, more from an oil and gas background, working with and for, let's say, the large major oil and gas operators such as Total and Shell. And I joined the geothermal industry 7 years ago when I was on this sort of crossroad, I guess, right? As a geologist, working in oil and gas and sort of appreciating your career, reflecting on life in general. And you think, do I want to stay forever in this oil and gas industry, or do I want to bridge to maybe some greener ventures? And to be very true and to be very fair, I think there's only one type of renewable and green type of energy that excites me, and that is geothermal, because it is, it's our subsurface industry at large, and it is understanding how we produce fluids or how we produce heat from a reservoir, whether we do that in a variety of technologies for whatever purpose we do it, but we extract that from the subsurface, which is in a way very similar to an oil and gas industry, let's say, person. And that excites me, and that still inspires me, and that still leads me to think that we can be as big as the oil and gas industry is today as well.
I love that. And I kind of feel the same way. Coming from oil and gas, it's so nice to take your understanding of that industry and be able to apply it to the geothermal space. There's so many crossovers. So I appreciate that. Okay. So now let's turn to the International Geothermal Association. So can you tell me a little bit about what this organization is? What are the key initiatives and how can people get involved?
So we are an association, and the International Geothermal, well, that's sort of self-explanatory, as in we do geothermal and we're international, as in we're sort of the only global association out there trying to unite and be that, let's say, global voice for all matters pertaining to geothermal energy. Advocating towards country governments, advocating for better policies, for instance, or understanding best practices when it comes down to guidelines for reservoir management. We collect data. We do stock take for the COP, so the Convention of the Parties, which is a big thing, especially after signing the Paris Accord in 2015, when the countries, at least the majority of the countries, signed up for that. Combating climate change and wanting to go down in CO2 reductions, and hence the national determined contributions, the NDCs of every government that is being, let's say, rewritten and re-strategized upon every 5 years. That's where we have a major role to play, influencing and setting, let's say, the stock take for those kind of bigger plans for the governments. And I guess, I mean, what I really like about your introduction to your podcast, you mentioned education. And I think, I mean, I'm in this role, Elizabeth, for 7 years, and I've been traveling quite a bit, which I like. But I come to countries where I've been before. And when ministers change, for instance, ministers of energy change because they have maybe a horizon of 3 to 4 years, I'm there educating their new minister all over again from scratch, what geothermal energy actually is. And that surprises me still, that we still have so much education to do. And education is linked, of course, to communication, is linked to the branding of geothermal energy. But it is also about us becoming, let's say, that global voice in a united way. And that is something that we're trying really hard as IGA. So the way we work, we have our affiliated members coming from the country membership, country affiliated members, such as the GR, Geothermal Rising, such as, you know, we have New Zealand, we have Kenya, we have Chile, all the countries that have national associations, they member or they associate themselves with IGA. And on top of that, we have let's say, a partnership and membership agreement with the companies who have a global interest to be represented either through tech or through, let's say, best practices, because we have a lot of operators who have joined us in order to make, let's say, their voice heard. And we do that with, let's say, the collective thoughts that more people should be aware of geothermal, so awareness raising and advocacy, that's super important and a key initiative for the IGA and its partners. But it is also about exactly that, what you were referring to, education, training, seminars, workshops, all these things we need to do much better and much more focused on, especially in those emerging countries. Sure. The ones who understand geothermal, have developed geothermal, have installed geothermal, and that there is still a lot of work to do within those countries, don't get me wrong, absolutely true. But on top of that, there are so many countries who have zero implementation on the ground. And it's those countries that we are extremely interested in helping to do the technology transfer, setting those best practices, and basically lifting them towards a higher ground.
That's incredible. So this sparks a question. So international, there's so much work to be done. Is there specific countries or areas around the globe that you're specifically focused on, let's just say in 2024, where you're putting a lot of emphasis?
Well, yes. So maybe also a little bit back towards the advocacy and the initiatives that spin around that advocacy angle. I can really see that we serve two very distinct markets, right? We do power, we do electricity, but we also do heating and cooling. Basically, the whole framing around the direct utilization of our resources to heat up or cool down cities, district heating, or the greenhouse sector, so the agricultural sector, or for instance, the whole wellness industry, right? Swimming pools, etc. They don't need to be electrified. They can be using geothermal resources directly, right? So I guess if you look at those two distinct markets, and we can go on, for instance, for mineral extraction, and we can discuss that maybe later as well within the podcast. But if you look at those two markets, what I see is happening and where we focus on a lot of attention. So in the heating and cooling space, China is leading. They have 100 gigawatt thermal installed, and they're drilling like amazing for new, let's say, projects. They develop their cities with and equip them with geothermal solutions, both for heating up and cooling down. And they do that because they have a clear ambition to get out of coal, because coal is polluting, right? It's polluting their inner cities. And hence, to clean up air, they drive geothermal. If I look at power, I can see in the US, there is a supernatural, even I would say, push these days under the Biden-Harris administration, under the IRA, and the DOE has of course funded a phenomenal amount of projects, but also R&D initiatives. So definitely the US is leading when it comes down to the installed capacity, but also the need to increase the installed capacity for geothermal power. But don't forget the Asia Pacific in the power game as well. Indonesia, the Philippines, definitely number 2 and number 3 when it comes down to driving geothermal power. And Africa as a whole is super interested. The Rift countries, as in Kenya, Ethiopia, Djibouti, Tanzania right now, they are on the rise for power. But if you really look at the southern African countries, South Africa, Malawi, Zambia, Botswana, they have sedimentary basins, right? And they can do a lot with the geothermal direct use opportunity. And that's another focus area for us. Africa as a whole with the two markets as well.
Okay. So, I'm not familiar with all of the international markets. So in the US, we've got next generation geothermal, where we're looking at EGS and we're looking at closed loop or advanced geothermal systems. And then Europe is implementing some of those techniques as well. When we look, and let's say like China, are they doing next generation geothermal, or are they deploying conventional in other parts of the world? Where does that landscape sit?
So at the moment, the landscape is very much on hydrothermal, what we would call conventional geothermal development projects, because they're fast, they're affordable, they're proven tech, and people need the heat. So there is a demand and there is a growth, let's say, market. And there is the available technology, both from a drilling point of view, as from an application, as in, let's say, the heating system and the heating exchangers and the district heating networks, basically, point of view. At the same time, China is, of course, very interested in going beyond, let's say, the traditional hydrothermal game. Has been drilling some exciting wells for EGS, and is definitely eyeing and sort of following up on all kinds of novel drilling technologies, including some closed loop. But at the moment, the inner drive, the focus area is the low-hanging fruit, and that's the affordable heat that is right beneath our feet.
It's very exciting times. Okay. This is one of my favorite questions. I like to know how people spend their time in the roles that they're in. So you're the CEO of an international organization. What does your typical day look like? And I mean, what's on your agenda this week?
So I love the question. Given that I travel about 80% of my time, I can't really describe an average day, let's say, at my office location. So I would say the following. If this is a typical week, I'm preparing for my upcoming travel, which is, in my case, next week, I'm going to be in Indonesia to join the IIGCE, which is the Indonesian International Geothermal Convention and Exhibition in Jakarta. I'm in Hungary on the Friday because they invited me to speak, and I do that a lot, my dear friend. I do that a lot, speaking and talking to people about geothermal energy, obviously, but also about, I'm more from a policy perspective busy with geothermal, and hence my view is more agnostic when it comes down to the technology or the type of reservoirs. I'm more looking at it from a government perspective. Okay, if we want to do geothermal for market ABC, how would we implement it? Where would we start? How much finance would we need? What are the policies? Do we have policies? Do we have a regulatory system that is helping to support the definitions of geothermal? And look, for next week, crystal clear, Indonesia is one of the leading countries in geothermal, so we don't have to explain anything about policies.
Sure.
But what Indonesia is very, let's say, looking out for is international parties to help boost the geothermal growth curve, both from a finance, a technology, but also from a resource management point of view. And those are exciting conversations, and planning for that is super interesting. Now, Hungary, Budapest is a geothermal energy summit. I was asked to meet some of the ministers and some of the, let's say, leading organizations in Hungary. Now, Hungary is a beautiful country, by the way, but also it has already installed capacity for geothermal.
Okay.
But it's a little bit too slow in our liking to really, let's say, move from the potential to the realization. And hence, these conversations hopefully can help to, well, put some action to the ground. So my typical day, is a bit about preparing for the next steps, as in my case, a lot of travel. It's about doing these kind of things. I do this quite a bit, podcasting, talking to people in general. I write pieces, whether it's an OP or whether it is about, what it is that the organization is doing. Talking a lot to our members and our corporates, finding out what they really need or what they are worried about or what they are concerned about. And as always within geothermal, there's a lot of thinking about how do we really move beyond our basically very small presence that we have worldwide. Sure. And that is the biggest, let's say, initiative that I think we should all be part of. That is, moving us out of the 0.0005% that we contribute towards electricity, or for that matter, the 0.1% that we contribute towards heating and cooling, right, worldwide.
So,
we need to grow.
So I want to ask, there's a couple things that came to my mind with your answer there. So first, when you look at globally and you're looking at policy across the globe, I'm just curious, where are the best countries that have the best policies that support geothermal? You mentioned Indonesia. Where are the most challenging? Where do you need to focus attention that has a lot of geothermal potential, but maybe not the best policies?
So, a couple of, let's say, logical candidates come to mind. Okay. As in, if I would separate again, and excuse me for doing that, but if I would separate again between power markets and heating and cooling markets, I would say that the entire Europe could do with some harmonization when it comes down to policies and towards directives, and when it comes down to the regulatory framework. It is. I know it's underway, and I know there has been many, let's say, hardworking organizations, people, individuals, and companies trying to push the politicians in Europe to stand behind geothermal, and hence looking after a more harmonized approach towards how to deal with the resource. Whether it is renewable is still in certain countries a question. Now, that can't be happening in 2024. To still need an answer around, is geothermal renewable, right? I mean, that should be a clear given. That should be the definition of geothermal. But equally, let's say certain countries treat geothermal as a mining entity, and hence as a mining law. It's being regulated under the mining law. Other countries treat geothermal as being a water body, and hence a water. Yes, it is super interesting, but it doesn't really help us, right? When you have a company that wants to develop or explore for geothermal, not knowing those, let's say, policy measures or policy instrument. So Europe, in my opinion, Europe can really do something about harmonization, because we are with 27 member states, right? It's not easy in general. So some harmonization there would be splendid. If I look at the areas where I would see a superb potential, are both, let's say, the Caribbean and Central American countries, and of course Latin America maybe as a whole, where you see that some of it has been tapped because we have power plants in Central America, and there is one or two demonstration sites in the Caribbean. But if you really look to lift those folks out of poverty, or to slash electricity bills on those remote islands or for remote communities, it's so logical to go into geothermal. Now, why is that not happening? That is a combination between not having the right policies, not understanding the resource, again, education, and hence educating also the regulators and the authority bodies on geothermal. And that goes also a little bit to the other side of the ocean, where you see, for instance, the phenomenal impact we could create in those in the Pacific Islands, right? Vanuatu, Fiji, the Solomon Islands. I mean, these folks pay an enormous amount of money per kilowatt hour, and something like 65 to 90 cents is not a joke. US dollar cents, right, for kilowatt hour. Now I pay here in the Netherlands 40. Iceland only pays 18 cents. I don't know what your bill is by the end of the month, but let us have a look at that and understand that those, let's say, the poorest pay the most, which is not good in my SDG type of Bible. SDG stands for the Sustainable Development Goals. And that's an important sort of lever for us to all contribute towards, fair and a just transition, but also a sustainable transition.
Fascinating. Okay, so I want to turn to ask, so what are the key goals of the International Geothermal Association over the next couple of years? So what impact do you hope to see with the efforts of your organization?
So at the moment, we are active in 88 countries, meaning that we have activities in 88 countries where geothermal is implemented on the ground. And can be a very small project, right? Can be one swimming pool when it comes down to geothermal heating or cooling, can be a super duper installation, a city network, or a power plant. So in 88 countries, we're looking after the geothermal community. We're understanding it, or we're whatever they need support, we support. And if they don't need support because they're brilliant anyway, then we just understand, can we take some best practices and transfer that to those other countries? So we're functioning more as a network and as a let's say, as a hub, a knowledge hub. And equally, the goal of the organization is, first of all, we pledged with all our members to triple up. This is a pledge that is supported by the Global Renewable Alliance, of whom we are a member, so with wind and with solar and hydropower and storage and green hydrogen, of course, green hydrogen, not blue, not gray, green hydrogen. And we want to see a triple up, let's say, installed capacity, both for power, but also definitely for heating and cooling in our case, by the end of this decade. So in 5 years from now. And that is for solar and wind, I guess, doable because they are going through the roof. But for geothermal, it means we have to act. And an important, let's say, mission of our organization is, yes, to do technology transfer, and yes, to enable, let's say, those countries outside the 88 established to help them have a faster profile when it comes down to deployment. But equally, it is about urging the governments who have already seen geothermal on their jurisdictions to go faster and to stop maybe just talking about it, but doing it, right? So to help with the financing, to help with, let's say, structuring, or to seek for a global risk mitigation scheme for drilling, or to finally stop, hopefully one day, educating. There's nothing wrong with education, but it's a bit weird that in 2024, people still do not know about geothermal, right? So we have a huge task collectively still ahead of us around education. And if we can solve that before this decade, Elizabeth, thank you.
There you go. I love it. Okay, so you brought up, financing a couple of times. What does this look like right now? Are geothermal operators, are they able to get financed? I know when we're watching what's happening in the US, it's slowly starting to happen, and it's super exciting. You don't see as many oil and gas companies. I mean, it's starting to happen where you see the projects coming out of getting into the geothermal space. But what are you seeing globally in terms of finances? And then I just want to ask the other question. Are oil and gas companies around the globe, are they interested in looking at geothermal? Are they getting involved?
So I think finance is our biggest hurdle. If you ask me, indeed, in a reframed way, what do you think is the biggest challenge, besides education, of course? No, I would definitely say finance. To unlock finance, to unlock the capital that we need in order to drill all those wells that we need in order to produce those, let's say, electrons and molecules that we need for both power and heating and cooling. we need to do something completely different. And that is restructuring the way we target our project management sheets, right? The balance sheets,
Okay.
the public-private partnership abilities, the 40% equity rule that the World Bank or any type of development bank will insist on. It is blocking us from tremendous growth. I am convinced of that. And I don't get me wrong, I understand from each and every financier that he or she has that sort of risk matrix. And geothermal just sometimes just doesn't fit in, right? Because we're too risky in the early stage and we have a too bit of an unknown entity in that specific region, or there is political risk, or there is whatever risk, and on top there is subsurface risk. We are just considered too risky, and we need to get out of that legal risk loophole, and hence financial loophole, before we can really grow. Second, you're asking about oil and gas. I mean,
yeah,
it is super interesting to me, and I guess we can have this conversation over and over again every year, because things are changing, of course, from year to year. Because an oil and gas company, in my opinion, an oil and gas company is a commodity-driven business model, and it's delivering from an operator point of view. I'm speaking, and it's delivering its, let's say, energy business towards the shareholder, who wants either to get a return on his or her investment immediately, as in every year, maybe every quarter, or it gets dividends, right, out of that investment. So it's a shareholder arrangement with a short eye on the bottom line of a specific energy company, which is commodity based. That is a fundamental different business model than geothermal. Geothermal is long term. It's patient capital. You will get your cash back, but probably not in the first 3 to 5 years. Do we have shareholders? The majority of geothermal companies, there are some exceptions, obviously, but the majority of geothermal companies are a combination between private and public. It's a public service that geothermal companies are delivering either to the grids with signed off PPAs, power purchase agreements, or to the utility companies to deliver on heating and cooling. Or in some cases, even a, let's say, very small contract between the owner of a greenhouse, right? So these are completely different business models. Fixed pricing, 20-year life cycle assets, thinking about straight prices, no turmoil, no volatility, no commodity, no big booms, but also no big busts. And that's an interesting thought, that one day, I guess, the oil and gas companies are going to hop on, because going bust because of a turmoil or because of a bust cycle, it's not great either, right? But given that there are still so many booms in a commodity-driven volatility, it's very hard to beat that business model.
Sure. Yeah. So, okay. So understanding that, when we talk geothermal, these wells, we're talking about a very long period of time before you get that return. So, when we look at some of the projects that are coming about in the US, they're behind the meter. They're driven by these data centers that are being built. Do you think that's going to have a huge impact to potentially allow this liftoff of geothermal? We saw Fervo with Google, Sage signed an agreement with Meta. How do you think the data centers could potentially impact?
Oh, I think that is look, it couldn't have been better, right? I mean, you have an off-taker who is just screaming for energy, and it's going through the roof. It's only going to be more screaming for energy, because we're only going to be utilizing more and more our these data centers, because the world is going to be extremely digitalized, and now AI kicked in, right? So now all of a sudden we are AI experts, or we all need to do something with AI, meaning that we're all again going on the digital highway here. And what I really like about this wave, and I hope it will stay under whatever kind of administration, whether we're talking about the US administration or European Green Deals or Asia trade, let's say, agreements. But what I really hope is that this surge for green electricity and green heating and cooling, with a, let's say, a certified 24/7 offering, that stays, because that is the real game changer here for geothermal. We are, in a way, still the only one baseload 24/7 enabler of that certified green electricity or green energy, let's call it like that. And hence those companies who take that serious, such as the Googles and the Amazons and the Meta or Facebooks or whatever that we have to call them these days, they are at least they put the money where their mouth is, to put skin in the game. They're investing in green electricity and they want to be seen as sustainable off-taker of green 100%. Electricity. That's a phenomenal game changer. That is exactly the game changer we were hoping for. And I just hope it moves outside of the US. I love the US, don't get me wrong, but the world is bigger.
I agree.
We have 193 countries and we need to do that more.
All right, so the next question that I want to ask is, when we look internationally at the different countries that are engaged with geothermal, do you see a lot of cooperation happening between different countries to try to get their projects launched and off the ground?
So definitely, I think, and look, as IGA, we always have a bit of we're apolitical and we're neutral. This is also why we serve and can serve so many different countries, and we're not standing in the way. Neither do we do anything to stop, of course, foreign policies. And there are many countries that have either a foreign export policy in terms of wanting to export their geothermal or energy type of knowledge, whether it's tech or finance or in whatever shape and form. Or there is, let's say, maybe a scientific cooperation between universities or R&D type of projects. And so as IGA, we're just trying to facilitate, collect all the knowledge and be that open hub. So for transparency purposes and enabling purposes. And but what I really see, and I think that is just phenomenal, of course, is, for instance, you see a strong cooperation Indonesia, New Zealand. They've always had that sort of natural fit between those who want to develop and those who need to develop. We also see a lot of, the US has a very strong network outside the US on developing and also constructing geothermal projects. Europe is more inner looking, as in between the countries. What I see is there is a lot of interest to understand from a subsurface point of view, where the opportunity sits, because we all share, without the political boundaries or country boundaries, we have large similar reservoirs, extending in northwestern Europe, for instance. So the countries can learn from each other, the scientists can learn from each other and can give more guidance towards those policymakers. So you see that's happening quite a bit. And at the same time, we can do much more, I would say, from an international perspective, because there is still so much to learn from not just the subsurface element, right? It's really about having those right incentives, right, the regulations right, having the finance right, and I guess this is what I would like to see us collectively doing also more, standing a little bit above everything and just handing out those tools to help countries to develop geothermal.
Okay, so there are so many, what I think are very exciting geothermal projects that are underway in the US. I mean, we're developing lithium with geothermal. We're doing behind the meter. We've got the closed loop geothermal pilots going on, next generation. And I'm really talking about the projects that I'm familiar with in the US. But what geothermal projects globally are you just really excited to see kind of moving along, that you're watching and following closely?
Well, I have to be very honest in that I follow it all, right?
Okay.
I am just sort of, this is also what I really like about my role. I have the ability to follow it all and to see it all and sort of either know of it and just, have some vague reconnaissance with it, or be in one way or form more and more involved. And I guess, from a technology point of view, and I think we share that because I heard your background as well, and, coming from oil and gas and being a little bit on that subsurface engineering, geology, geosciences sides, I think everything that sort of brings in me the passion has to do with understanding how we can, drive more energy out of a green resource as geothermal. So everything that is tech related or lithium related, as in more commodity value out of our brines, is just super fascinating. What I also find super fascinating is what Iceland is trying to do, is drilling in hot magma, right? I love that. I think that is just, science fiction in a way, but on the other hand, they are going to do it. They are going to do it, and I bet they will be successful. And it's not just Iceland, it's a whole team, of course, of scientists But the fact that people are interested in exploring deeper, further, bigger, better ways to drive the geothermal growth curve, to me, that is, I applaud all of that. But if you really ask me what I would like to see more of,
Okay.
is smaller projects for remote communities, for those who are underserved, who are having no access maybe at all to electricity, who may live on or nearby or on top of what we would call as geologists like, hot springs, who have maybe a bubbling water pond nearby. And either through not being, known or not being educated on that, have no idea what to do with it. And I guess if you look at the phenomenal amount of proven small-scale technologies that we also have in our portfolios, what I would really like to see us driving much more, and I know this touches more on, let's say, a development type of program and an impact type of program, but I think we should just deploy the terawatts of solutions that we have in our portfolios across the world and finally help solve the biggest burden, and that is people that have no access to energy. I think that should be gone by the end of this decade, and we can do that. We can really do that.
Sure. It just reminded me, my mom, she installed geothermal wells on her farm in North Dakota. So isn't that maybe like
Your
10 years
mom
ago?
is
Yeah.
a pioneer. We need your mom to
My
speak.
mom
Yeah.
is the biggest advocate. She won't
Super.
stop talking about geothermal on the moon. She sees that as like the next thing to get us to Mars. So
But phenomenal. I mean, I read this wonderful paper that says, and I think it's even quoted by Elon Musk, that says, look, if ever we're going to be, inhabiting Mars and lunar,
yeah,
whatever, moon, it's going to also, it's probably not going to call it geo, but it's going to be Mars thermal or lunar
right.
thermal.
Yeah,
Because let's be honest, there is no sun, and there's certainly, well, maybe there's some wind, but we have what it takes to drive the inner
right.
energy out, and we can do this in all the planetaries. But let's do our planet first, right? We do
Sure.
the others. We do the others later.
So funny. Okay, so I want to conclude by just asking, what advice would you give to individuals who are in, let's say, oil and gas,
Mm-hmm.
because there's a lot of them, and they're looking to transition into geothermal? What would you guide them on?
So first of all, do it. Absolutely do it immediately. No, and of course there is a bit of a hurdle. Maybe there is no right fit job, or maybe you look at the salary differences, or whatever it is that may stop you. But in general, and I know this is my own personal crystal ball, but I can honestly say that I can only see growth in geothermal, and I can see more exciting new type of technologies coming into commercialization in the coming decade. So especially when you're in that age, let's say maybe 25 to 35, and you have some experience in oil and gas, and you like the subsurface, you like the energy game, you like the energy, let's say, sector as a whole, fill your backpack with knowledge, get acquainted with geothermal, whether you do that within in-house learning, or you go on a few courses, or ask your line management to visit Geothermal Rising in the US or wherever you are. But do it. Equip yourself with the next generation that is going to be needed. A lot of scientists, engineers, professionals in our subsurface space, because I am convinced geothermal is going to be booming after 2030.
I'm right there with you. I follow that same sentiment. Well, I want to thank you so much for joining me today, and I want to thank everyone else for joining us on the episode of Geothermal Unleashed. I hope today's discussion has sparked new insights and deepened your understanding of the geothermal industry. So thank you, everyone.